future land use types and how we're going to learn kind of what the conclusions from that survey are in real time from the expert this evening. So I'm hopefully as excited about that as all of you are. And I think Jeff's going to be with us at 6. So we've got a few minutes. So let's move through the housing analysis here. One of the things we do when we talk about doing a market analysis, right, is we want to look at two things. We want to look at supply and we want to look at demand. So part of any study like this is we want to examine existing supply. And we've talked a lot about existing conditions in Canal, Winchester, and a lot of the kind of characteristics of the housing that exists. But what we want to do is dig a little bit deeper and actually look at data that you can get from the Fairfield County, Franklin County assessor, as well as some of the private vendors that we use that deal with residential and commercial real estate brokerage. And what we want to do is kind of look at what are the trends in the market. So we all kind of know just from living in this community, what we have and what villages at Westchester is like and Canal Cove and so on and so forth. But let's try to start putting some numbers to that so we can start talking about, like we're developers. So if a developer in the future is, looking to do a project here, what are some of the prices that the market might tolerate? What are the sales records? One of the things we want to do is kind of look at what impact did the whole kind of 2020, 2021 pandemic years have on the market, and how did they track with national and statewide trends and even metro-wide trends. So one of the first exhibits that we do is we want to look at sales, and these are total sales in Canal Winchester since 2019. One of the points on this is that these data that you're looking at include individual properties that have been resold. So for example, if house at 123 Waterloo Street changed hands 2 separate times in that time interval, in that window, that's going to be captured in that data. So when we see 949 there in the lower right corner, that's considering that's not 949 individual houses. There could be some houses that had changed hands, for example, multiple times. But what we're seeing is kind of a pattern, right? Existing home resales are 663, 286 new home sales in that time period. And then we can see it broken down by price. You can see the price differential about what sort of the market is tolerating for a existing home, which is right around 290,000. If you look at all of those transactions averaged out. If you look at new homes, so obviously brand new homes, first owner moving in, we're looking at about price premium of $40,000, $50,000 over that, about 322,000. And then if we average all of those together, you'll see that we get to about an average price of about 300,000. So over the last 3 years or so, considering sort of the high points that have come in the last year and kind of where we started from 2019, we kind of have an average sale price there in Canal Winchester of about 300 grand. Let's go. Those are just detached houses. Condominium sales are aggregated a little bit differently. We can look at the average price of a condo sale and it's a bit lower. It's 212,500 on average. We have fewer data points to go off of because there are fewer condominium properties in the community. So 107 total sales occurred in these types of properties from 2019 to 2022. And again, you can see the price breakdown there in terms of share of sales, right? Most of them were selling between $150,000 to about $250,000. So one of the things we do when we gather these data is we like to start doing scatter plots. You can learn a lot from scatter plots. The way scatter plots generally work is on our bottom or our x-axis, we look at time, and on the left-hand side axis, which is the y-axis, we're looking at price. And so we can do all sorts of really interesting relationships and try to suss out trends by displaying data this way. A lot of times you look at a set of data and you can draw totally different conclusions once you just start playing around with it and developing new ways to visualize it. And there's a lot of strength in that. Jane has really mastered a really great data visualization tool called Tableau, which we're going to be using to do a lot of these exhibits. This is an example. So we're again looking just at single family. There are no condos in that particular data set. So we're looking just at single family homes here. And we're looking at sale price, and we're looking at how does the sale price correlate with the year the structure was built. And again, you get all of this from the assessor's data. In this case, we've done it such that if you're looking kind of more toward the blue, toward the pink, we're looking at older properties, generally the more historic properties in Old Town Canal, Winchester, places like that. Once you get more into the red, we're generally looking at post-war, and then really the bright red, kind of like the darkest red dots that you'll see. Those are the newest houses. So generally a new build would show up in the darkest color there. And it may be a little bit difficult for people in the back to see these, but sometimes it also helps to just kind of zone out a little bit and blur your eyes when we're kind of analyzing these and thinking about these. That's actually a technique I use sometimes. But when you look at this, you'll see really what your intuition would tell you, which is you're going to see the lighter colored dots, and especially the blue dots. Some of the blue dots, the really nice rehabbed historic properties, are there kind of toward the top of the chart, kind of in the top price range of sales. So the 400s, 500,000s. But more generally, you're seeing lighter colored dots, blue dots, kind of in the lower end of the price range there, around 150,000, 200,000. And then most of the dark red dots kind of cluster around the middle. Again, we gave you an average sales price in the previous slide, and that was roughly around $300,000. And so, you can kind of get a sense of that sort of being the kind of middle ground there on this chart. One of the other things you can do with these is you can fit a trend line. And so if you see that kind of thin gray line that slopes upward, kind of along the middle of the chart, we can kind of plot a general mathematical relationship between all of these dots to try and understand, is there a general trend when we look at the relationship between these two variables in this case, right? In terms of, the month of sale date, the sales price, and that third dimension, which is the year built. So, in this case, we're not surprised. The price has gone up. Prices market-wide or statewide, nationwide have gone up somewhat significantly over the last year and a half. They're coming back down now, and that's reflected in this trend line. So let's go to the next one. This is kind of the one this is kind of like the newspaper graph, right? Like if you were a newspaper reporter and you were going to write a story about home sales in Canal, Winchester, this is kind of the graph that you'd want to put right there in the middle of your column of text. If we're looking at price per square foot, this is really a kind of industry standard way to look at home sales. Instead of looking at just overall selling price, we kind of divide it out by square foot, because that way it standardizes all of these properties, rather than to say, well, why did that one sell for 500,000? And why did this one sell for, 150,000? We can divide it all out by square feet and kind of get a more accurate estimate when we're comparing property to property. And so if we look at all sales, again, this includes condos, I believe, in this data set. We look at sales per square foot, we can really see that Canal Winchester kind of tracks with the statewide and the national trends. We put March 2022 there on that graph because that's kind of when the sort of COVID pandemic conditions kind of hit.
It should be 2020. I apologize. Yeah.
Oh, I hope it wasn't 2022. So that's March 2020. We can see we had relatively stable sales prices prior to that. Through 2019, they kind of hovered in the 120 to 140 range. They started raising up a little bit more through 2020. There was an interesting little trough there at the beginning of 2021, but it immediately recovered. And then you can see kind of the meteoric growth in sales prices through early 2022. Looks like they peaked right around the spring, May, June at almost $200 per square foot. And the most recent data we have goes through October, November, and you can see that they're kind of settling back down there. There was a little trough there back in September, about 158, and the trend is moving downward again. We want to suss out how much of that is due to inflation. Definitely some of it's due to inflation in just the national market. And a little bit of that is also just due to, changing conditions and changing demand. As people decided they wanted to kind of uproot themselves during the pandemic. They have more flexibility to choose where they live and work on a more flexible schedule. That's also playing into the trend of rising prices. And it's also based on a factor of relatively limited supply. When we're just looking at the city of Canal, Winchester, we're basing that off of the fact that, only a set number of houses have been built during that sort of last year and a half, 2-year time period. So now if we take a scatter plot approach to this and we look at price per square foot, now we're going to get a different trend line, right? We're going to get a downward sloping trend line when we look at price per square foot and we look at unit size. And when we look at unit size, we're generally looking at the finished area above grade on a house. So garages aren't counted in that. There are various definitions about how real estate agents, assessors, brokers, and things look at it. But again, we're going with the assessor data so that we have a constant, we have a clear comparison in that data set. So when we're looking at area finished above grade, that generally means your ground floor, your second floor, but it can mean a part of a built out basement as well, but generally does not mean garages, does not mean unfinished basements. And so this is pretty standard. Every market that you're going to do this type of analysis in, you're going to get a downward sloping trend line. And really what that means is it's kind of the Costco principle, right? When you buy, let's say, a little jar of salsa at Dollar General, it's going to be relatively expensive. When you buy that gigantic tub of salsa that looks so, engrossing at Costco, it's a lot cheaper per ounce, right? As you get bigger, the price per unit tends to go down. And that's what happens with house prices as well. The higher the floor plate, generally, the lower the cost per square foot. The other dimension that we can see on there, I'm sorry, Jane, let's go back one. The other dimension we can see on there again is we've got these colored by year built. So we can kind of see how generally newer product tends to have a larger floor plate. You can see over there between 1,200 and 1,400 square feet, there's kind of like a cluster of dark dots that were all kind of, you can tell that's one uniform product that was all coming online at the same time. And you can also see that kind of below the trend line, there around the 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 square foot level, you're getting a lot of the lighter dots, right? And those are the older homes in this community. And the older homes, of course, are generally kind of less than 1,600 square feet. The industry standard now, people are generally wanting larger houses, and you can see how those kind of dots cluster kind of around 2,000, 2,200 square feet. We can look at this in a number of different ways. We can do price per square foot. We can look at it by number of bedrooms in the house. That's kind of interesting. And there are a number of other visualizations that we've done. We just kind of wanted to show you kind of a sample of some of the data that we're aggregating here for this report. We want to go into the multifamily market and give you a little bit of preview on that too. And so when we look at the multifamily market, there are a number of different data sources that we can use. One of the ones we use is CoStar. I don't know if anyone's heard of CoStar. They're a very powerful engine because they have kind of aggregated a number of pre-existing commercial real estate services. And so they have a very robust database of what every market and submarket is doing. And they update that quarterly. And so the data you're looking at are through, I believe, the third quarter of 2022, because third quarter data just came out not that long ago, a couple of weeks ago. When we talk about submarket, CoStar, in this case, breaks up every metro area into a number of submarkets. And our submarket where Canal Winchester is the bar in red there. It's the Southern Columbus submarket. The Southern Columbus submarket in general is very closely related to the trade area. And we're going to show a picture of the trade area, but if I can kind of get you to think back to our time at Brewdog, when Bob Gibbs was giving his retail analysis, we talked about a trade area there. This trade area for residential is pretty much the same as the trade area for retail, right? It's kind of a blob that engulfs Canal, Winchester, the areas north along Ginder Road and Diley Road. It engulfs Pickerington, engulfs part of Groveport. It extends just within the 270 outer belt, captures a little bit of Obetz. That's about how CoStar also has defined this sub area as well. And so when we look at sort of the share of inventory, what does that mean? We're talking about the total number, if you think about the total number of multifamily properties. So that could be anything from a townhouse to brownstones to, if you remember last month when we showed all of those images, one of those podium buildings, right, with 100+ units that you might find in the short north or something like that. Really anything that has 5 or more units generally counts as a multifamily property. And when we think about the Columbus area as a whole, we want to think about, well, what parts of that metro area have more properties like this and have less? And so when we see Southern Columbus, we can see that that sub area contains just about 8% of the total inventory. When we look at some of these other areas, those 2 bars in between the red bar, you'll see Upper Arlington is up there about 18%. Northeast Columbus is up there at about 18%. You'll also see some surprising things. You'll see downtown Columbus maybe doesn't have as much of the total metro area market share as you might think, just based on your perceptions of downtown Columbus. The other data point on there is what is the average asking rent? Again, this is expressed in terms of square foot. So just like with single family houses, we price multifamily properties that are for lease in terms of square feet for the exact same reasons. And so we can see that in Southern Columbus, as an aggregate, those multifamily properties are all going for about $1.10 per square foot. That's significantly less.
Per month, correct?
I'm sorry?
Per month.
Per month, yes, per month. However, the lease is negotiated, but that would be the metric, yeah. And we can compare that to some of these other areas. If we look at Upper Arlington, for example, no surprise, that's going to be a much higher for lease price. That's about $1.52. But we can go down and we can look at some of the outlying counties. So they take the outlying counties together. So Morrow County, Licking County, Fairfield County as a whole. And I know that part of Canal extends into Fairfield County. We didn't want to adjust for that because there are so few multifamily properties total in the community that it doesn't really skew the data that much. When we look at those outlying counties, we can see kind of the floor price in the region as being about $1.04 per square foot. And we're not that far above it. But there are other areas in the Metro Columbus region that are way outperforming that. Dublin Hilliard, that kind of northwest metro area, that's going for about $32 a square foot for comparison.
This might be the more easy.
And of course, Jane prepared a much easier way to look at that. We can just look at those numbers I was throwing out in a bar graph, and we can see how we're kind of toward the right end of the bar graph. In the sense that the price per square foot asking price for properties in our trade area aren't going for what they are in other parts of the metro. Part of that is because the supply just isn't there. We're going to get into the supply inventory in a second. But what we see in really the Southeast Columbus submarket, and again, just based on your experiential, knowledge from living here in this area, you kind of realize that we have a lot of very, traditional, compact kind of apartment style complexes. If you think about what's going in the Columbus, legally the Columbus area up on Ginder Road, some of them have very nice design standards, but ultimately they're really classed as kind of a basic apartment property. And they have various levels of finish that impacts the rents. But at the same time, they're not commanding the higher rent levels that you would get for properties in a Grandview Heights, downtown Columbus, Dublin type of a market. One of the other things that's important to look at is vacancy rates, right? And we're doing especially for lease properties, because for lease properties, you have a much better metric for measuring vacancy rates when property owners are surveyed. And we can look at kind of percentage vacant by submarket. We're number 2. The outlying counties have actually looks like close to a 15% vacancy rate. And these are actually what they call vacancy defined as delivered units greater than 90 days of non-occupancy. So these data sets throw out what they call kind of latent vacancy rates. So example, I'm a developer, I build a complex and it's just now coming online. I haven't pre-leased it, for example. We're not counting units like that are vacant because their first tenant hasn't moved in. We're looking at units that are changing hands and haven't found a tenant, right, for a set period of time. So we can see that our submarket is hovering right around 8%, but at the same time, Upper Arlington's right around that band. Northeast Columbus is right around that band. That's actually pretty average for the metro area to kind of be in that 6 to 8% vacancy range.
And these don't include single family homes?
No,
correct?
These are all multifamily for lease properties. Now we can get into some scatter plots when we're doing our price analysis. We take data points from all over the metro area, and these are things that we're gathering via just good old detective work, looking at what's published listings over the last 2 to 3 months, making phone calls, making email inquiries. And we're trying to get, there's a lot of subjectivity because we want to get a group of representative properties in representative areas of the Columbus market. I mean, if we were to go and physically look at every single property, right, within that 7-8 county area, it would give us a huge number of data points, but at the same time, there would be a lot of kind of static in those data points. What we want to look at are properties that are, comparable to what exists in the market, to what's being built in kind of our trade area, our submarket, and what's being built in kind of other areas that maybe we don't have in terms of what we know about our supply. So for example, this is the Canal Winchester kind of submarket area. The blue dots, and there aren't very many data points there because we don't have very many for-lease multifamily properties in Canal Winchester. But we also wanted to put Pickerington in there, and we wanted to put Southeast Columbus in there. So again, these are legally in the city of Columbus, but they're physically proximate to Canal Winchester, right? So think Gender Road, for example. And we can see, again, we didn't have a trend line on this slide, but we can see that downward sloping relationship. Just like with for sale houses, as we get higher in terms of square footage, generally the price per square foot goes down, just like when you're getting anything at Costco. Now these axes are, we can go from one chart to the next because these axes are standardized between charts. And so maybe flip back and forth a little bit, once or twice between those two. So we're going to look at where that cluster of dots is, that constellation between our local area, our local submarket. And now I'm going to take another example submarket. And this is kind of the North Columbus study areas. And on this one, to kind of keep it simple, we put 3 communities on here just to give you an idea of where kind of the metro market is in some of these different areas. So in the blue dots on this one, the aquamarine color, it's the Easton area. The orange dots, we've got the New Albany area. And I should say that's the New Albany area that's legally in the city of Columbus, where they're building gigantic amounts of multifamily right on the border of New Albany. And it's very funny when you look at the leasing information for these properties, they all advertise themselves, as the Groves at New Albany, the Glen at New Albany. They're doing everything they can to make you think you're living in New Albany. And I would bet you if we went over there and actually surveyed those people, they would have no idea they lived legally in the city of Columbus, probably 70 to 80% of them, because their zip code is going to say New Albany on their mail as well. We also have the Dublin market on there because the Dublin market is, as we talked about with Bridge Park and some of these other developments, is kind of rapidly going in a more urban direction. And so let's go back and forth one more time. So we can kind of see that the data points here get a little bit more clustered together and the average asking price is a little bit higher in these communities. And let's go over too
far. Let's
go over one more. And we're at 6 o'clock right now. So we want to just kind of wrap this up a little bit. We're looking at Columbus. When we say Columbus, we're looking at kind of central areas of the city, the downtown, and the areas immediately surrounding it. We're looking at Grandview Heights, and we're looking at the short north. And we have other data points in there as well, but just to kind of keep these charts simple, again, you see that downward sloping relationship and you see the much higher price tolerance that you're going to get in those markets. And of course, that makes logical sense. You're talking about larger projects that have a much greater capital cost. And you're of course talking about, much higher cost for a developer to kind of navigate the property purchase price or the land purchase price, the permitting landscape, and so on. All right, so we talked about supply a little bit. We want to get into demand. So we're talking about what we have, what are the going rates, what are the asking rates, what are the vacancy rates. Now the demand side of things gets to who's actually coming into the market that would demand either a single family or multifamily property. And we can go through this really quickly. We've talked about tapestry statements, and I know Bob talked a lot about the data that he provides, right? They know that you went to Cracker Barrel, for dinner last night, and they know you stopped at Walmart. This is the same principle. We can break out population into these types of segments. And the reason that you do it is because even though everybody's kind of a unique flower, like they taught you in kindergarten, at the same time, there are statistically significant trends when you look at these tapestry segments, one of which is the propensity to choose a particular type of housing. Some of these tapestry segments have an overwhelming propensity to choose a traditional single-family house with a lawn, a 3-car garage on a large lot. Some of these segments have an overwhelming propensity to choose an urban format, multi-unit building. And so we want to look at, what's currently in our trade area, in our market. So let's go, we talked about where the trade area is. We can look at some of our top groups, and again, I'm happy to go into this in a greater level of detail when we have more time. Is that our top one, City Lights?
Yep.
So City Lights, this is relatively high median household income group. There are, it says 1,813,000 households, that's nationwide. They have a median age of roughly 39.3. So they're kind of getting into the middle-aged category. They're established. They have families. They have a propensity to choose really more of a compact single-family house type of product, not necessarily the more traditional suburban large lot product. The next one is the Workaday Drive. This was called up until I think this year soccer moms, but they decided to change that to maybe something a little bit more inclusive. You've got a much higher median household income in this tapestry, and again, based on Esri's little stock photograph there, you can see they are overwhelmingly suited to a more traditional single-family product, like what you'd find in villages at Winchester, for example. And let's kind of go through the rest of them. We can talk about those later. I don't want to keep our sub-consultant Jeff waiting. So I want to get into some kind of crystal ball predictions. And, I say crystal ball, but it's actually a lot more sophisticated than looking at a crystal ball. Hopefully the results are what a good person with a crystal ball would tell you, which is, how many units are going to be supportable over the next 5 years. We looked at various models to use as inputs in this, and one of which is Morpsey. Morpsey has done very sophisticated population modeling. They've divided the entire Central Ohio region into what they call TAZs, which are very tiny little units. And they have a number of inputs that it's based on other communities' future land use plans, existing development proposals, so on and so forth. And we've used their population projections because I think they're pretty darn good. So when we just look at isolating Canal Winchester, we see our 2020 census number is about 9,100. And that's kind of the number that everybody kind of colloquially throws around when we're talking about population. The 2022, what they call American Community Survey estimates, that's 9,500. So you've already seen population growth in the last 2 years, which I don't think is a surprise to anybody. And then moving out to 2025 and 2030, Morpsey is predicting, again, 10,200, and then ultimately about 10,800 by 2030. And I know there have been some new developments just in, the last 12 to 18 months that could probably push that a little bit higher, right? When we think about some of the major investments that are coming to Central Ohio, in particular, the Intel development, which is already spinning off, a number of new developments up there in the New Albany area. All of those, even if people who are coming there to work for Intel or maybe work in some of these support businesses, all of that has an impact that kind of dovetails into the entire region. And so one of the models that we ran to kind of say, well, how might those, secondary, tertiary impacts, play into Canal Winchester and a housing profile? What would that look like? And then kind of looking at those tapestry data, breaking that down by propensity to buy or lease certain type of housing product, we can kind of get a snapshot over the next 5 years or maybe even 7 years as to what might be supportable. And so, and this is a very conservative scenario. I mean, we could crank these numbers up and make it a lot more aggressive than this, but you always want to have a very conservative baseline so that you know what to expect. If you get more, excellent. But at a very minimum, I think you can expect a demand for over the next, again, 5 years. And this doesn't mean that it's going to be, all weighted on 1 year. It could be, weighted on year 5 or weighted on year 4. But it's almost like if you go Rip Van Winkle and wake up 5 years from now, what could you expect to see without question supported in the market? It's about 300 new traditional single family houses. So if we want to compare that to what we have, think Villages at Westchester for that type of a product. We want to look at compact large lot compact small lot single family houses, something a little bit more like Cherry Landing. You're going to see that housing preferences are shifting, and the demand for that type of product for the people that have, a propensity to move into this submarket is going to be higher. We're looking at close to 400 compact small lot style single family houses. Then we get into attached formats, and the numbers go a lot smaller, but I want to put a disclaimer on that. When you look at the smaller attached formats, 1 to 5 units, so that could be a traditional attached condominium product, like what you have in Charleston Lake. Could be a small block of like new townhomes. They could be duplexes, triplexes. If you recall the missing middle housing discussions that we've had over this process, we kind of call that lower missing middle. We see a smaller number there, about 65 units. And then when we talk about the larger developments, 5+ units. So maybe something that's not even on the big end where we're looking at 100+ unit buildings, but something like 18 West Waterloo, where they have 11 or 12 loft units over retail. There's definitely support for that in this market as well. One of the things too that we can take into account is that some of these, we call it the slide, in the sense that, there's kind of a spectrum of a preference there between one end of the spectrum, which is kind of the large lot, semi-rural single family, and then a loft over a main street retail, right? One of those formats kind of slides into the next. It's like, okay, I'm comfortable with a large lot single family house, but I can't find one in Canal Winchester. Maybe I could become comfortable settling for a smaller lot, but still single family house, because I got to have a little green space and I got to have my garage. Maybe someone that starts to look for a small lot single family house says, you know what? Maybe I could settle for a duplex. Maybe they get a tour of a duplex and they think, oh, okay, this is somewhat close to what I was originally looking for. I can learn to live with this. When we talk about slide, it means that these numbers can kind of augment one on another. So if I have, 65 units of, attached format 1 to 5, some of those units could actually get programmed in, if I'm thinking about a developer, into a larger development, adding to that 48. So there's a little bit of play and variability when we try to break it down by individual product type. When we total that up, we're getting to 794, but you can confidently say 800 new units of housing supportable. And that's in a very conservative scenario. And that's only over, about the next 5 years. Considering taking as a baseline what you have and what's already in the pipeline, based on, with the city's projections for build out, you're looking at about doubling what is currently kind of projected to be built out by the 2025-2026 timeframe. Oh my gosh, so we're 10 minutes past. Let's check on Jeff.
I think you might have to
I might have to admit him.
Adam, are we recording?
We are recording. And so I know that was kind of a whirlwind, and we will have plenty more time to talk about that. But I want to make sure that we give Jeff his due to report on all of this hard work we've done on the survey. And Jeff, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
yes, Jeff, we can. We're trying to figure out the camera.
Okay.
We want to make sure you can see everybody.
I can hear everyone too. I'll take this opportunity to say hi and enjoyed the presentation, Adam. Hi, Jeff. How are you doing? I'm Paul.
Good, Paul. Jeff, good to meet you.
The volume up.
The volume comes through the laptop.
It's coming through the laptop.
So you need the volume and the projection to go through the
Yeah.
camera on the TV.
All right, Jeff, just give us 1 second. We're trying to get
Absolutely.
you on the TV mic rather than on our laptop mic.
Okay.
There's always. It's there. There's a catch.
Andrew, do you know if this gets turned on separately?
I know it turns on when that computer up there is on. I can at least get you speakers.
Or do we want to switch over to,
If you do,
The-
you have to send me the Zoom info so I can accept it and log in that way.
so we could just do it through that computer? What do you think about? So then we would have the Zoom through that computer instead of just casting to it.
Okay.
And then you'd
Just
have
like that.
access to the camera, right?
'Cause we don't
And
need
the
this
speakers.
presentation anymore, right?
Right.
Yeah, they just send me the Zoom.
Okay.
info and email, and I'll log in.
Just these speakers. Issue with your.
I think we're just going back to, they're grabbing speakers.
That work? Do you want to try and get started? Jeff, why don't you try introducing yourself and
Sure. So I hope people can hear me. I'm Jeff Bernstein. I am a professor of political science at Eastern Michigan University. I also direct our faculty development center there, and I have done a fair bit of consulting work over the years for local governments and nonprofit organizations. Are you able to hear me okay?
Nope, not yet. There you go.
all right, we just got some speakers.
Nope.
Go on blue. It's the speakers.
Yeah, that would help.
right, Jeff, can you just try that for our speakers?
Okay, I am still Jeff Bernstein from Eastern Michigan University. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
All right, go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, Adam or Jane, did you want to say anything before I begin, or?
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's good to see everyone today, and I can only see certain pieces of the room. So I'm going to talk, and if you have questions, please just jump in. And Adam and Jane, if there are people who want to ask questions that I can't see, please just feel free to interrupt me. I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about what I did in terms of this survey, share with you a little bit. Do you have a copy of the material that I'm working with, the draft report?
Yes.
People do have that? Okay. So I will work off of that. I'll refer to table numbers and pages when I want to show you material from the report. And then again, if there are questions or anything, please interrupt if you wish, or I will certainly have time when I'm done talking to answer any questions you have. So as I said earlier, I am a political science professor. I am experienced with survey design, survey analysis, quantitative data analysis, and was pleased to be part of this project. As you know, you were on putting the survey together. I was brought in once the survey was out in the field and have spent some time analyzing the data. Top line, 309 surveys were started. Of these, 64 were not completed. Of the ones that were not completed, 60 just did not have any particularly meaningful data to play with. They either opened the survey and then closed it, or did the first page and then stopped. 4 surveys were abandoned most of the way through, and I was able to use those. I also used 4 surveys that were mailed to me. People who came and got paper copies of the surveys, filled them out and mailed them to me. So the results I'm going to be presenting here are all based on approximately 253 responses, which is about a response rate of 10%. I should also just say one other thing here. I view my job here as taking the data, presenting it to you, and showing what the data say. You are the experts on Canal Winchester. You know the city. You know what is politically and administratively possible and what is not. I don't feel it's for me to tell you what you should be doing in terms of where you should go in development. Should you go for more or for less? I really see that as a job for the elected and appointed officials. My job is to just put the data in front of you, give you some knowledge to be able to use and work with. So let me begin by just briefly talking about the demographics of the survey responses. If you look at table 1.1, one of the things that you will see is that the survey respondents were older than the population. The city population, according to data supplied to me by McKenna, 27.2 were below the age of 34. Obviously, were kind of a low estimate of that. In terms of the race of respondents, the population data that I was handed said that 9.0% of the population of Canal Winchester is African American. The survey respondents were 1.2%. So there is an underrepresentation of African American respondents. Of the respondents, we have 88.9% identified as white. 6.3 chose not to answer that question. So it is a very white set of respondents that we have here. I also have some results that show we are 60% women in the survey responses. 2/3 do not have children in area schools. 31% do. The folks in the sample that we have, had a wide range of years where they've lived in Canal, Winchester, but more than half have lived there for over 11 years. So it is, I think, a fairly long-standing population that filled out the survey. Not terribly surprising. Folks who are new in a community may be less connected, less likely to respond to a survey. And 27.7% of the survey respondents say that they have attended a public meeting in Canal, Winchester in the last 2 years. I don't have data to indicate how much of the population has. My knowledge of local government suggests that people responding to this survey were more likely to be the kinds of people who have been attending public meetings, the people that you presumably are meeting in your work with the city. One of the things that I did when looking through the data is I chose to try to weight the sample by what I felt is that since the sample skewed a little bit young, it might be wise to weight it by age to basically give a little bit more weight to the younger respondents who filled out the survey, a little bit less weight to the older respondents, so that the survey sample, would better reflect the population of the city. So as much as possible, what I'm presenting to you is trying to reflect what the population says. You have only 250 respondents. Obviously, you have far more people than that in your city, but as much as possible, I'm really aiming to try to represent the population. There are two big caveats that I want to make at the outset. One is if you ever follow presidential politics and polling in any election, you will know that there is variation that goes on. That you do a sample, you get a certain number of people, you measure the attitudes, but there's always the risk that you're going to get somewhat of a skewed sample just by random statistical luck. That happens. That is just part of the nature of polling. The other problem is a little more systemic, and that is this survey was sent to a large number of people, approximately 10% of whom chose to fill it out. I have to believe that the people who got a survey from the city and took the time to fill it out do not look like the people who got the survey and chose not to fill it out. I think the people responding to the survey are almost certainly more engaged in the city. My sense is they are probably more likely to be unhappy than the folks who just get the survey and say, okay, I'm not going to bother with it. They're the people who, when asked, give their opinion. This is an unfortunate nature of survey results, but it is just the nature of the beast and something that we should be aware of going forward. So with those caveats in mind, let me just start moving through the data. What I have done is I have presented in this main report, going section by section, sort of the top line results that are here. So if you look at section 2, I'm on table 2.1, which is on page 6. And what we asked in this question is we said to people, what are your priorities for Canal Winchester? And you'll see on the left-hand side of this table, people are indicating what they view as the biggest priorities for the city. The way I set this up is people either didn't rank it, right? They either just did not list it as their top 3, or they listed it as third highest, second highest, or highest ranked. And I averaged it so that if you said highest rank, it's a 3, second highest ranked is a 2, third highest is a 1, and if you didn't list it, it was a 0. And if you look at this table, and I'm going to kind of send you to the right-hand part of the table where it says average, this is the summary measure of people's priorities. The overwhelming top priority on this list is public safety. You could see that 43% of the people said it was their highest ranked item. Economic health and stability came in second place. Okay, and then looking down, there were a few things that kind of clustered around the third rank. Community cohesion, which was defined as satisfaction with government and services, the city heritage and aesthetics, and recreation space were sort of in that vying for the third spot. Those were the top priorities. I do present in this table the raw average, and then on the far right-hand column, the weighted average. And one of the things that you could see if you look at the two is there's not a very big difference. So I am weighting results, but it's really not changing things a whole lot. But here, the top line clearly is public safety and economic health and stability. On the following page, we're looking at the transportation and sustainability priorities. And here, the preservation of open natural space is the top ranked priority. 38% said that it was their highest priority. 37 said that it was their second. So fully 3/4 of the people rank it in their top two. In a clear second place is the preservation of active farmland. And then you've got a few others kind of clustered below that. But the preservation of open and natural space is clearly ranking as the top priority under the heading of transportation and sustainability. In the next section of the survey, you all asked, what do the residents of Canal Winchester value? People were given a list of statements, and they were asked to indicate whether they strongly favor that value, somewhat favor it, all the way down to strongly oppose. One of the things you'll see is that not a lot of people opposed these values. Very few people, for instance, would say that they oppose a sense of belonging as a value. But as you look to the average columns on the right, you could see the numbers here are fairly tightly clustered. A few things emerge as more important than others. Economic well-being is one of the highest ones. A beautifully built environment, green space in the community heritage and history, a small town feel, right? High quality public services and infrastructure, community events that appeal to all ages. These are things that are really most highly valued. Being a regional destination is the lowest ranked item here, and it is the lowest ranked by a fair bit. So that one was least valued. Part of the problem with table 3.1, as I said, is there's not a lot of differentiation there. But I do think you get a little bit of a sense from these results what the people value and perhaps what they value a little bit less. In section 4 of the report, we talk about the positive and negative aspects of living in Canal Winchester. And if you look at table 4.1 on page 10, what you could see there is the percent who indicated that they see it as a positive value. People here were fed a list of, I believe it was 17 items, and invited to check however many they wished. So you could see here, about 60% is the most favorable, is the aspect that was checked by the most. The most popular item here was location in the greater Columbus region. There were also high scores for the park and recreation options was above 50. A sense of community was above 50. The overall appearance of the neighborhoods and the activities also ranked right at about 50%. There were other items that ranked lower. Being close to higher education was the one that ranked the lowest. Only 4% of people felt that that was valuable. On the flip side, table 4.2 asks people to indicate what they see as the least desirable or the less desirable aspects of living in Canal Winchester. And we see here that the three items that people felt were least valuable were the traffic volume. Apparently, y'all have a bunch of traffic there, and people do not like that. The rapid pace of development and the appearance of industrial areas. These were the items, as I said, that ranked lower in the aggregate. And you could see from the table that there were some things that very, very few people checked off. So in table 5.1, we consider what items could be improved about Canal Winchester. Here, once again, people were given a long laundry list of items and asked to check whichever things they felt were the ones that could be improved the most. And the big winner here was the variety of retail and restaurant options. 56% in the raw data, 52% in the weighted responses of people indicated that this was something that could be improved about Canal Winchester. They would like more retail and restaurant options. The only other item above 40% was a kind of a repeat item, a very similar one, entertainment, dining, and or nightlife options. So these are clearly the two biggest themes that emerge. People also think that the pace of development could be improved. It's unclear from that response whether they think it should be sped up or whether they think the pace of development should be slowed down. And there are a few other things that are in the 30s, but it is the restaurant, retail, dining, entertainment options that are the most, the items that people most wish could be improved. In section 6, we asked people about what are their preferences for funding public service and amenities. The way this was phrased is you need to raise $100 to fund quality public services and amenities for residents. Please decide how much you would raise from each category below. And the categories were income and property taxes, and then job growth facilitated by new development. And the data in table 6.1 indicate that people would like to see amenities improved, public services improved by about a 2-to-1 margin, with job growth facilitated by new development versus raising taxes, city income and property taxes. I study political science, and I think the notion that people do not want to pay higher taxes is something that my discipline is well aware of, and the data seem to indicate that here as well. I've given you some other information there about the distribution of responses. For what it's worth, about a quarter of the people would like to raise $0 from income and property taxes. And then it goes, from there. 7.6 would like to raise all the money from income and property taxes. I broke this down by some demographic factors in table 6.3. There's not a whole lot happening there. Just about everyone is in that fairly narrow band. I'll talk a bit more about demographic factors in just a moment. The final section of the survey asked people about their reaction to land use and development. So when you look at different types of land use, for instance, do we have too much of it, too little of it, or just the right amount of it? And if you look at table 7.1, many folks are fairly happy with some of these things. 62%, for instance, believe that there is just the right amount of single-family residential development. But as you look at some other numbers, 48% believe that there is too much multiple family residential, like townhomes, duplexes, apartments. 71% believe that there is not enough entertainment. 56% believe that there is not enough green spaces. So you can see as you kind of dig into the table that there are elements of satisfaction, but elements of things that people would like to change. Table 7.2 looks at people's reaction to the mix of residential development. And again, you could see some satisfaction with items. The theme that emerges to me here as I dig through this table a little more is people think that Canal Winchester needs less multifamily dwellings, fewer duplexes, fewer triplexes or quadplexes, fewer townhouses or residential homes, fewer apartment style housing or less apartment style housing. But that's about where that is. And in table 7.3, where we look at the mix of commercial and industrial development and how people react to that, one of the themes that emerges here on the bottom two lines of the table is that people would like to see less light industrial buildings, whether intended for research and development or whether intended for manufacturing. Those are the least popular items. In terms of commercial and industrial development, people would like to see more neighborhood scale mixed use areas and more traditional Main Street mixed use areas. I have a brief paragraph at the end where I summarize some of the open-ended comments. It very much reflects some of the things that we've been talking about here. I notice this. I imagine that this is your reality of every day in Canal Winchester, that you've got a group, it seems, that really would like to see more. They would like to see it as a bustling place, more nightlife, more entertainment, more restaurants, more stores. And then another group that seems to want more green spaces, preserving farmland, bringing us back to the small town feel that I would imagine many residents of Canal Winchester grew up with and really value. This is one of those moments where I say, this is, I imagine, a challenge for you to figure out how you kind of blend these two different sides, which seem, from my judgment, to be all over this survey. I will say just one more thing, and then I will turn it over to all of you for whatever questions you have. What I have presented to you in 17 pages and 20 minutes are basically the broad outline of the results, the basic top line for each survey. I believe it has been appendix that takes each of these tables and kind of breaks it down by demographics, by age, by gender, by whether people have a child in the school or not. My view is that this ought to be an appendix to the report because I have just thrown a boatload of numbers at you. There's a whole lot of stuff there to digest, and throwing another 20 to 30 pages worth of tables at you in this report, I think, risks paralysis by analysis. But it is my intention that you will have all of those appendices there to use and to be able to make statements about, do younger people favor something more than older people? Do folks who have lived here for longer favor things differently than folks who are relatively new in the community? But I do think that there is quite a bit of information conveyed just from looking at the sort of overall top line data. And with that, I will stop and open it myself up to any questions that you may have. So thank you all. I assume you've been a good audience because I can only see a few of you, but I assume you have not been, passing notes back and forth to each other. So thank you all for listening.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And I'm happy to kind of act as moderator.
Okay.
So that you can hear what questions are coming in.
Okay.
And
on the appendix, and let's just look at A2-1.
Okay.
Housing availability and choice under 35.05.
Mhm.
What do those numbers mean?
What that means is that in ranking these values, 3 would mean it's the highest priority, 2 would mean second highest, 1 would mean third highest, 0 would mean it is not a priority. That point oh, the average under 35-year-old person there is giving it a priority of 0.05, which is basically, it is not a priority. 1 in 20 of them is basically ranking it as their third highest priority.
Okay,
So,
so 0 would be the lowest.
yes,
What would be the highest?
theoretically 3 would be the highest.
Thank you.
If every person rated that as the highest possible value, then that item would have a 3.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, don't be shy.
Yes, 10% sample size. Do you think that's adequate to? How does it compare to what you normally get and this sort of thing?
I would say that in the 8 to 15 range is probably fairly typical for this. Sometimes it goes a little bit higher. The problem is, and I'll kind of go to my discipline here. When we talk like about political polling, for instance, the example that I always give to my students is, would you rather have 100 people randomly dialed from the phone book or 10,000 people from the DIAG at the University of Michigan? Okay, now the naive answer is I'd rather have 10,000, it's a better sample. But if you know the politics of the University of Michigan, 10,000 people from the DIAG is surveying 10,000 from the generally left wing of the spectrum. I'd rather be extrapolating from 100 random people than 10,000 non-random people. So, is 10% a good number? Really good number, and I think you could really do things with it. The caution that I would always make is we are assuming that the 10% are a reasonably representative 10%. And again, as I said earlier, the people who fill out the survey are often a little bit different from the ones who don't. I think you could do something with this. I really do think you could do something with this, but I would just caution you that you are going to be hearing disproportionately from the folks who are active in the community and have thought about the issues. The folks who pay no attention to the work that you all do are probably less likely to be responding to the survey. I hope that was probably more answer than you wanted to a very simple question, but I do hope it was helpful.
Yes, it was. Thank you.
I haven't had a chance to read, but it sounds like there's references to comments. Will we be able to see some of the raw comments from people?
That's a much question for us.
I would imagine that you would.
Okay.
Yeah, now that Jeff has worked his magic, we can get back into Alchemer and start extracting this data on our own. We just didn't want to do anything until he had generated his conclusions independently. So yes, we will be able to get those word for word.
Great.
And Jeff, I noticed you summarized a little bit of them on your last page. Is there any kind of, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but is there anything that kind of came across in reading those? Because it is subjective.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I went through them and I sort of tried to group them into common themes, not a tremendously rigorous grouping, but as I suggested earlier, I think one of the big things was really this tension. I mean, you had around 15 people who were saying things like, we need to have more restaurants eat in town. We need to have something to do in the town. And then another 15 who said there's way too much development. We're losing that small town feel that we love. I can't tell you that it was exactly the same number, but they were both really kind of high numbers and roughly equal numbers. The other thing that struck me was, about half a dozen people sort of expressed kind of negative sentiments, right? Why are you even bothering? You don't care. You're not going to listen to us. I imagine that's probably not news to all of you. But twice as many commented that said, thank you for asking. We're really glad that you care. We're really glad that you did this survey. And, I often in similar conversations will tell people just the simple act of asking can often make people feel good about things. And there were quite a few who did express sentiments like that. And I thought that was noteworthy and worth pointing out to all of you.
I'm curious, you weighted the responses by age because the younger people were underrepresented.
Yes.
Why did we not also weight it by gender or by race when males and African Americans were so underrepresented?
Two great questions. So the issue with gender is I did not have in the data that I had the actual gender breakdown within the city. I didn't know, so I didn't know if I should be weighting it against 55 or 53. So I didn't have a weighting for that. The other thing is the overrepresentation of one rather than the other in that case struck me as not tremendously large. In terms of weighting by race, the problem is there were so few African American respondents to the survey that it would have really been placing a lot of weight on a very low number of respondents. I think there were probably about 5 or so, maybe 6 African American respondents in the sample. And to weight by that small a number would have really given a very disproportionate weight to a very small number of respondents. So one other challenge of weighting, by the way, is when you weight by a particular category, you're making an implicit assumption that the people who are in that category are broadly representative of that group. And when there were only 6 African American respondents who did the survey, I think that would be a very untenable response to that. So I just did not feel comfortable doing it that way.
Thanks.
All right, this is your chance.
So when we pull the data out, will we see the demographics of the people? Because I think the comments based with the demographics may actually be more telling or less telling.
Did you hear that, Jeff?
No, I missed that last. I'm sorry.
So when we go back in, will we be able to actually look at a particular, are you talking about looking at a particular response?
Well, like if we want to, so I understand and I agree, the representation maybe like the African Americans, but if we were to take those survey results and like look at the comments, maybe look and see if there's any other themes, at least it's, if they're generally the same theme, then that's okay, they fall in line. If there's any significant themes, at least it's worth us discussing.
I see. So you're saying let's pull those 6 surveys, for example.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'd be able to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Certainly would. And Adam and Jane, I am happy to, when I just finish tweaking some things, I am happy to share with you the SPSS file that I created and manipulated that has some of the breakdowns that I think might make your job a little bit easier in doing that kind of thing.
That'd be wonderful. We'd appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think now that we've kind of worked through this process, in a very controlled manner, we can start to get under the hood and slice the data up, any way you'd like. And I think the other thing that we've talked about too is now that we've kind of gone through the, controlled, statistically valid manner of conducting a survey, right? We can reopen this survey to the general public. You don't need a QR code or a postcard, and we can gather additional responses. But I think, we want to look at these responses as, the representative sample, because once we open it up again to the general public, you might get somebody taking the survey multiple times. You might get, again, I don't know, Jeff, if you have any thoughts on that. If, let's say we have this open again for another month, anybody's free to take it. We pull the results and then we want to compare them to the results that you're presenting tonight. What would your recommendation be on how much weight to put on that, or how much of our time do we devote to it in terms of how valuable that could be?
my gut instinct here is to really prefer the sort of survey that you have done so far to something that's sort of thrown out there into the community for anybody to respond to. The concern, would people take it multiple times? The concern, would one really angry person email 30 of their friends and say, hey, you need to do this survey to really make the we're saying. I think there are, as I said earlier, there are always risks in doing a survey that you are not getting a fully representative group. But I think this is probably the gold standard compared to what you might get if you threw it out into the broader community with no controls over it.
Okay, so we can still go ahead and do that, but we want to take it with maybe more than a grain of salt. I mean, I think that, we can really be proud of the results that Jeff has played such a big part in generating for us as part of this plan.
I mean, may I throw out a question to all of you? Have I surprised you tonight? I mean, are there things you're hearing from this that you're surprised about? The heads that I'm seeing are shaking their heads no.
I'm struck by how similar it is to all the Post-it notes we saw at both festivals.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just for background information, Jeff, we were at two festivals, a Labor Day festival and a summer blues festival, taking just open feedback, right, on Post-it notes, saying, what is your big idea for Canal Winchester? We did a fall workshop as well, and we've categorized all of those notes. And even though it was kind of an open-ended question, right, I mean, these results very closely track, which is what Eileen was commenting on.
Yeah. Well, and I take absolutely no credit for this because all I did was look at the data that was provided to me. But I think, a lot of what we do when we work on data is we triangulate, right? Surveys are imperfect instruments for understanding popular sentiment. Post-it notes at a blues festival is an imperfect instrument for understanding what public sentiment is. When you're in a situation where one imperfect instrument with another imperfect instrument, then the conclusion I would tentatively draw is we've got something that we're talking about. We know what reality looks like, and it's probably not an artifact of an imperfect survey and not an artifact of an imperfect Post-it note thing at a blues festival and a Labor Day festival. It's probably reflecting that this is the underlying sentiment of what the people here want. So hearing that these results don't surprise you and hearing that you saw similar things on Post-it notes, again, I claim absolutely no credit for this, but it does make me think that you probably really do have a pretty good handle on where the sentiment is. And now you've got data that you need going forward to start, putting some meat on these bones.
Okay, no other big surprises? Anything jumping out at anybody? I'll share one. The fact that if you go back to table 2-1, when we look at priorities, I'm not surprised that public safety ranked on average as the highest priority. I'm surprised that by the magnitude by which it ranks as the highest priority. Seeing that, we just look at the weighted average, that's a 1.81. And the next highest value in that column, that rightmost column, is economic health and stability. That's all the way down at a 0.99 for second place.
See, you're not on social media in Canal Winchester, you would have known it was going to be.
I didn't think it would come back that high. I didn't think it would come back to that way.
Adam, we saw back here too, it's almost weighted, if you look at page 11, for the table 4.2, the least desirable aspects of Canal Winchester, one of the lowest is public safety. So you have people prioritizing for public safety, but it's the least desirable, like it's not a bad thing. So just me looking at it makes it seem like if we have a safe community, that's why they desire it. but it's not unsafe, so it's not a detriment.
A potential alternative explanation of that result in table 4.2 may be that people, when it says public safety, police and fire, people may not be unhappy with the police and fire that you have now, that it may be interpreted as a statement of confidence in, say, the leadership of the police and, say, the leadership of the fire department. So I'm not sure how to interpret that result, but I might throw in there that that is sort of a measure of satisfaction of the folks in the job right now, but also squaring with this being clearly a very, very high priority. And I have to say, again, I don't know the city, of course, but it was stunning to me just how much higher public safety was than anything else. That was a fairly strong statement by people, in my judgment.
I just have two statements. One, like, I'm not surprised by who took this and who is underrepresented. And to go along with that, there's still something that we need to do differently, because Adam and Jane came into the school today to talk to our high school students, and many of them are underrepresented students that are in our community, and that is our future. If we think about the next 20 years, are we going to continue to allow, or what can we do different as a community to bring the underrepresented voice to a higher level?
If I may just very briefly respond to that, wearing the hat of my day job as teaching poli-sci, I think a lot of students nowadays are very, very much engaged and very much attracted by national political issues that really have captured their attention and imagination. And you all know that a whole lot of the things that really affect the quality of our everyday lives are happening in rooms just like the one you're sitting in today at the local government level. I find it a challenge teaching political science at the university level to engage students in questions around local government. And I think that certainly would be time well spent for folks there in the community. I mean, I'm thrilled that Adam and Jane are, talking to high school students, because local government can really be a very important place for, as you certainly know, for people to get involved in, and particularly for students to be involved in.
So Jeff, on that note, I'll ask you as the poli-sci professor, have you have any experience or case studies with a community that is making, concerted, meaningful effort to include people at the high school level on, local boards, local commissions, those types of things to really get participatory action there?
I don't have anything more than some, positive anecdotes I've heard from cities that I know of. So I don't have anything systematic, but I will certainly take a look, and I have a colleague I can ask about that question.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah.
I don't have a case study to present to you all, but I worked in a community where the city themselves had a teen council, and they worked within their own group, and then they were also liaisons to the other commissions and committees that the city had established. And it really kind of gave them the pathway to stay in the community and be involved and have their voice heard, but also educate the rest of their community on the issues going on. I would like to follow up, Jeff, more than just the outreach to a high school community. Do you have experience in how to incorporate these underrepresented voices, even just at the community at large? I mean, you highlighted how, if we are looking at it by race, how there are a significant underrepresented population, and what is kind of the best practice, if you have any to share?
Again, nothing, in any sort of systematic study way, but I know in Ypsilanti, Michigan, which is where my university is located, they have, for instance, a human rights commission there. And they are really quite active about reaching out to students at the university, and I think even to students at the high school level, and trying to get them involved in small ways around issues that they might care about. Ypsilanti is a very progressive city, and I think it's an attractive place for young minoritized students to be joining and to be getting involved. My guess is that if you approach people and say, would you like to get involved in local government? People have all sorts of feelings and indicators toward the word government that turns them off. But a direct invitation to say, hey, we'd like to get you involved in this. Would you be interested in joining this group? Would you be interested in going to this meeting? I think can be very valuable. If I could just share one quick anecdote. Shortly before the pandemic, I worked with the Ypsilanti City Council in a goal-setting session. And I sat there with the city council members and the department heads for 2 evenings, 3 hours each night, working to facilitate their discussion about council goals for the year. The first night, there were 4 people in the audience. The second night, there was 1. And I tell that story to my students, and I say, if you want to go and show up at a rally around, pro-life or pro-choice politics, you'll be one of 100 people there. Nobody will see you. But if you care about human rights in your community, show up at the Ypsi City Council meeting. During a break, walk up to one of the council members who said something you agreed with and say, hey, my name is Bob. I really thought what you had to say was interesting. I'm interested in being involved in the issue. I said, show up at a second meeting, you'll end up on a committee. And, and again, I think there's something to be said that, opportunities to bring students into local government. I had colleagues who made it a requirement that you attend a local government meeting in either your home community or in Ypsilanti as part of a local government politics class. And I think the ones who are interested, again, I imagine it's like that in Canal Winchester. If you want to get involved, the gateway to doing so is fairly low. And then you get people working. I am proud as heck that in the last election, I counted 6 students of mine, almost all below the age of 30, who were running for local office somewhere in the area. I love it when I go to an Ypsi City Council meeting and I see 4 or 5 of my former students who are either council members or department heads there. I think making sure students realize that, there are there to be involved starts the process. Again, one of the other problems you have is, you involve them as high school students and then they go on, they graduate, they move elsewhere, but hopefully some other community is seeding that interest in the people who will one day move to Canal Winchester.
Excellent.
Can I ask a question? What were the dates that we collected the surveys information? It says November 2022 on the top of the second page, but that can't be right.
Oh, Michael, we've got those dates. And Jane, do you remember when the postcards started going out?
They hit the mailboxes the 5th, right?
19.
You send the collection in 15 days.
Okay. My second comment is public safety is a visceral issue. Very few people in Canal Winchester actually experience crime. We have a very low crime rate. So when you put out a survey, something like public safety, I would submit to you that people react on a visceral level, which is subject to all the propaganda or newsworthy headlines that they see on a national scale. This was surveyed during an election year when all the politicians, or many, were talking about public safety, public safety, public safety. And I think that you have a distorted public safety number here because of the timing of the survey and because of the nature of the question. It wasn't based on any actual rational experience with public safety. It was based on a visceral response. I want to live safe. Oh my gosh, there's so much bad stuff going on in this country. I want to be safe. That's just how I look at it. I don't think that the 1.81 is an actual reflection of what is happening in Canal Winchester and the way people really feel.
I think we saw our local hot topics come up in the survey, which is another thing that's not surprising, right? Like, those are the people who want their voice heard over and over and over again. Yeah, so like
Direct correlation with the
Right.
Facebook commenters.
right,
All of those groups.
right.
So Jeff, were you able to hear Michael's comment? Do you think that being just our timing, doing this coincident with the midterms and, you know, a lot of that kind of messaging going out nationally may have been in people's minds?
I mean, I think it's certainly a possibility and probably not a small possibility. You know, obviously a lot of the election did focus on this issue, and crime, I think it's fair to say, was somewhat of a wedge issue in the 2022 midterm elections. And in Ohio, I know you had a governor's election that was not especially competitive, but you had a very competitive Senate election. Lots of money going on there. And I know that this was an issue that that mattered to voters there. So I think it's certainly possible. And it probably is that this issue is somewhat inflated. I might point out, though, that the fact that this issue could be activated and the fact that people's concerns about this issues could be activated suggests that even if that concern recedes post-election, it will remain very much a part of the political discussion. I mean, I don't want to get political here, but a large part of a Republican argument heading into elections is that people are not safe in Joe Biden's America. That will be said less in December than it was in November, but it is certainly going to start recurring again. So I don't think that, you know, the high numbers in November 2022 are a one-time blip. I think these views will be activated again as the political winds heat up. And, you know, again, it's job security for me that we're heading into, you know, the Republican presidential primary process starts very, very soon. So the break that we may be experiencing now from national politics is a relatively short-lived one. But I think your point is very, very well taken.
I guess when I read that question too, like I was thinking, like, how important is it to you and your community? Like, obviously, I'm always going to read public safety as a high importance, because without safety, then you get nothing else, right? Like, so, like, I mean, I think public safety is just kind of its own little thing. And some of these, I don't know.
I don't think it was just the election, though.
Well, I think-
You're hearing a lot more about gun violence everywhere, but you're shooting my wife. Oh, another shooting somewhere, you know, it strikes her.
Yeah.
Well, and when we look at the answers on table 2.1 and compare it to the answer on table 4.1 and 5.1, where public safety come back up, I think to agree with Mr. Vasco, but also to agree with you, I think everybody's saying, I'm concerned about my safety. I want to live in a safe community. And what you see on social media a lot is, lock your doors, my car was broken into again and they stole my change and they took a package off my porch. And yet percentage-wise, we do have low crime, but people feel like, oh, the crime must be fairly large in this community because it's on Facebook every single day.
Constant access to information.
Yeah, so, but if you say to someone, well, has your car ever been broken into? No. Have you ever had a package stolen? No, but it's happening everywhere, it's rampant. You know, so I think you get that sort of, we must have a problem here. I mean, one shooting in Canal Winchester is one too many. However, I think to your point, is sometimes, or more to your point, that sometimes people take that in, that what they read and think it's just rampant all through Canal.
Well, it's also that we're lumped into that whole Southeast Columbus. You know, the news says shooting in Southeast Columbus, and it turns out it's 10 miles from here, but it still makes you think that it's our community.
Yes, because people even on social media, that was on Hamilton Road.
Yeah,
You know, they'll come
a
back
long
and
way
say,
from here.
it was in Canal. No, it was on Hamilton Road, but you're right, we do kind of get lumped into that.
Remember a year ago, the shootings north of 33 in the city of Columbus, and it was reported on radio station after radio station that 3 people killed in Canal, Winchester. And you're like, what? And then, no, it's not Canal, Winchester. That's the city of Columbus.
It is our school community though, sir.
Right, I was
Like,
gonna say.
those
but-
are our people.
Right, and to be fair, that's like saying, you know, that there's this invisible line between Bexley and Whitehall, and crime never crosses over to Bexley. You know, I mean, yeah, it was technically in Columbus, but they were residents of Canal, you know, they were students of Canal,
Their
Winchester,
addresses,
so.
And I think that was, Kristen, a big topic of conversation amongst the high school students today, especially those that live in Columbus, but they identify as Canal
Winchester.
because that's the high school they go to. And, you know, they don't see any distinction between where that zigzag line is from parcel to parcel.
But as a practical matter, Canal Winchester policy could have nothing to do with crimes that occur in the city of Columbus.
True.
Don't you think that's also reflected in the, one of the last tables, 7.2, that we need fewer duplexes, fewer triplexes, fewer townhomes, fewer apartments? From what I know, we have very few of those now.
Yeah.
All of those are north of 33 and in Columbus, but I think the response is we want fewer of those. They don't even realize they aren't here.
Mhm.
We have some, but we have I
There's
did a
like-
city tour. I know there aren't very many, so yeah.
I tend to agree with you on that. Is when you think of imaginary boundaries, and you're not intimately involved to know where they are. Anywhere that has the zip code or within an eye shot, you assume it's in the same community, especially when school districts start to blend over. And that result will bleed over. But again, there's not a lot in Canal, but there's a lot north that they are part of like a blended society. You know, that can also.
I might add parenthetically that I live in the city of Ann Arbor, and if you asked me to outline what the boundaries are of the city of Ann Arbor, I'm not sure I could tell you.
Okay.
You know, that I think that this section is, but maybe it's the township, I'm not sure. So I think
one thing that we discussed at the high school regarding this is, yes, your policy, like, you don't control the police cars in Columbus and you don't control the land use in Columbus. But something the students said that struck me was, if you feel a sense of pride in your community and you feel a sense of belonging, you're less likely to commit petty crimes, or, you know, you're not gonna litter. You're going to respect where you live. And while it's not a definitive policy item, it is something that, I mean, everyone here can play a part in, right? Yeah.
Do we get to see or hear some of the feedback?
Yeah, we did, it was.
I hope to have them present actually.
Oh, really?
Once, I hope.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of just like saying that's gonna happen because it should. But I would hope that you guys would hear that, and I want them to present to city council as well. Like, it's pretty powerful to hear from their mouths, their experiences.
How many showed up? How many did you talk to?
About 20 students, student council.
Oh, great.
All
All
grades?
grades.
All grades.
Well, Jeff, you've been very generous with your time this evening, and like I said, we appreciate all your hard work on this analysis and the time taken here with the steering committee tonight. I mean, do we have any final questions? Because we want to make sure you get the rest of your evening free.
it's been absolutely my pleasure to be here, and thank you all for listening and for really engaging with this. I've enjoyed our time together.
And I know that if anyone has any questions kind of on the back end, we can forward them your way or or put you in touch.
That sounds great. That sounds great.
Okay, excellent, Jeff. Well, like I said, you can feel free to stick around. I'm going to keep the Zoom open actually because our colleague Paul, actually I should give Paul the opportunity if Paul, you have any comments. I know you've been on this remotely as well.
I've been listening and I appreciate the discussion.
All right.
Thank you, Jeff.
So
He just held his picture up.
see, he's not eating dinner.
No, I really do appreciate the discussion, Jeff. I think you did a fantastic job and I appreciate you sharing all these thoughts with everybody. I was really interested in hearing from the committee tonight and, I'm excited for next steps. I really am feeling like, having these results and seeing them align with many of the discussions we have really empowers us to make some decisions. I see some places where this data aligns very well with some of the goals. I see some places where it doesn't. And I think that's the purpose of planning, right? I think we have to decide the direction for the community. And we can contextualize some decisions about that direction with this result, these results. So I'm excited to incorporate them into our next steps in developing the plan. Was that a better comment?
Thank you, Paul.
I like the other picture.
Well, we always, Paul's hair grows at an astounding rate. I have to say, a little jealous there. So anyway, Jeff, we can let you go and enjoy your evening. And again, just on behalf of everyone in this room, I know you can't see all the faces, and there's another, because of the holidays, about 5 or 6 more people that will be watching this recording. But I want to thank you on behalf of everybody for all your hard work, and you're a valued part of our team, and we just appreciate you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good night. Take care.
All right, Paul, do you want us to keep you on? Let's keep you on. You're muted.
I'm definitely going to stay on, although I don't need to be the talking head with my camera on. I know there's more discussion, so.
Okay. All right, so 7:17. I think we made great progress. We can go back. I know we really flew through that first part of the meeting with the market analysis, and I do somewhat apologize for it. That was just a fragment of the overall data, but I wanted to give you high-level results to show kind of where we're moving on that front as well before we got into the survey. And I had actually thought we would do it opposite, and then Andrew had the brilliant idea to say, no, let's do that first, so that we can have a hard stop. So we can get back into that. If you have any other points for discussion on the survey, we can do that as well. I want to make sure that everybody in this room has their comments heard.
There's a lot to digest. It may take a few read-throughs to really assimilate.
And I hear you loud and clear on that. And so, like I said, I know you always have really good, insightful questions, and so don't hesitate to let us know. I can pass that along as necessary if it's something I can't answer. Jeff is on board to help us understand this, because when we get into crosstabs, and I know he's going to do these appendices tables, they call them crosstabs, in the industry, and so he's going to do more of these. So that we didn't get overwhelmed. He didn't want to do, because I think he said they came out to 60 or 70 pages or something like that. We didn't want to give you 70 pages of tables. So be happy to share those with you and answer any questions as that goes forward.
So Adam, I guess my question on the survey is the results in regards to development a lot of what I expected them to be, which is people generally don't do any more development. And so how do you move forward with the results from the survey with a planning document that's planning for more development?
Mm-hmm.
Does the word development need to be defined?
I think many No more housing, no more.
Yeah, I think if you look at the results, it tells you that people don't want any more housing types. They don't want any more commercial retail development. They maybe want entertainment options, but they don't want any more
Buildings.
buildings.
And
And so
definitely
how,
no industrial.
right, so how do you look at that? Or office? I mean, office was the same thing, they don't want any more office as well.
Was
Yeah.
it 60?
And so at every land use category there, the preference is for no more development. And so, in that context, should the plan just target farmland preservation and open space? And we shouldn't consider any more development options here?
I think
Those
that's,
are the questions that need to be answered.
that's a question that absolutely is front of mind. But I would counter that too and say, well, let's look at, table 6, where by a 2-to-1 margin.
Yeah.
They would say, well, we want, funding public services to be through job growth facilitated by new development.
Correct.
Now,
Mind you, they only had 2 choices.
they only had 2 choices, and that was, I think, by design, right?
Well, they want the services,
So
but you don't.
I
want
mean,
people.
in planning in that
That's all.
context, we can plan for no new growth and development, but that development will
Because
happen,
federal
it just will not happen within corporations.
Suppose services.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's what needs to be conveyed.
Right.
And people can say that it won't, but you're seeing the proof is in the pudding with what's happening in the city of Columbus and the massive amounts of development that are happening.
As I was thinking about that dichotomy, which I think you articulated very well, that is there, what immediately came to mind, and this is simply a knee-jerk response, is I found myself envisioning islands, if you will, that were surrounded by, flanked by green space, islands of this type of growth, whether it's retail, whether it's residential, whether it's smaller scale commercial, not industrial. And just find myself exploring ways of achieving vehicles to achieve the growth that's needed to fund the city, but also preserve the values that were articulated. And doing it by way of islands of development is simply one idea that came to mind.
Islands meaning development surrounded by
Green
reserved
Correct.
space.
Rather than things just kind of flowing, like Phoenix basically flows into one big,
Yeah.
huge 25% of, of that part of the state, rather than having that type of development, rather than not, they go into sections of quote unquote development surrounded by
Mhm.
visual and aesthetic respite.
But isn't that a little bit like not in my backyard?
And that's not necessarily bad.
I think it's irresponsible for, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think it's irresponsible for us as a committee to say that we want no more development. That all we
I
want to
agree.
do is preserve farmland.
I agree.
Because that doesn't address the future of the city, it doesn't address the future of this region, which is booming. But I think you can preface, I would assume that the report's gonna have an introduction or a preface that's gonna explain that, yes, some people may be opposed to any kind of development, but we have to plan 25 years down the road.
think
I
it'll
also-
Be balanced with, the rest of the market analysis that will be done. Like if there's a preference for no more industrial, does the market analysis say that maybe where you don't need it anymore, we're full? Or will it say, well, based on your population and who lives here, their demographics? More of that, because if we open, Barnes and Noble, it'll close in a year because nobody can staff it, nobody will go there. So I think that whole dynamic will play into where are the appropriate pockets, to what level, how much. Because right now we know housing, and with the housing data we have, we can choose, do we want a land that promotes only large lot? And we know that will slow development because the preference in the data is for a small lot. Or do we say, we want no multifamily, so we know a section of that 700 some unit number won't be captured, which slows development.
Well,
I also think there's, we've talked about the plan as an education tool. And clearly there is a little bit of education gap that we've just discussed about people saying, no, there's too much multifamily. Like the survey results say, people are like too much multifamily because people don't understand that there's almost no multifamily in the community, right? So I think there's also an opportunity for taking it with a grain of salt and understanding that there's the education piece that needs to continue with the plan moving forward with this, making development decisions.
Oh, Paul's got his virtual hand up.
Yeah. I could put this one up too. I think, you know, Lucas asked the big question, you know, which is, you know, do we just create a plan that's not really a plan and just reflects what people want? Or do we create a plan that reflects data, the fact that growth is coming, and a plan puts forward a plan for growth, but a plan that is aligned with the type of place people want to create? And there's a lot of conflicting opinions that we hear. You know, we say we want Canal Winchester to be an inclusive place and a community that welcomes people from diverse backgrounds. And then we say we don't want any multifamily housing, right? You know, those ideas don't really align with each other. The other thing that's important is that, you know, growth management is good, but growth management doesn't mean no growth. It means choosing where and how to grow, and growing in a way that will still reflect the community that people know and love, so that the Canal Winchester 20 years from now will still reflect the values that made this community great. And a plan that just says no growth will likely fail. And that's what we have to do, is we have to create a plan that will you know, be implementable, that will be able to be achieved. And you know, I think the other thing that I would say is, yes, we probably could say no development in Canal altogether. But what would happen is the community would get leapfrogged, right? Or it would look vastly different from the surrounding area, or it wouldn't actually be able to maintain itself financially. You know, so there's a bunch of things that we have to think about in contextualizing this data. And I think, Jane, you also made a great point, which is we have to educate on why, you know, why the values we're hearing can be achieved with some ideas that might not on its face seem to align with them. Like, you can have great places that are mixed use, and multifamily is a part of that. Not all multifamily is the same, right? So that's why kind of earlier I said we've got the challenge now of creating a plan, because, you know, what we're hearing, you know, does reflect some ideas that are anti-growth, right? But that might not be a practical path forward for the city. And I think we have to explain why. And we have to make sure this committee agrees with the path forward. That's our challenge. So, you know, I think it's an exciting challenge, exciting place to be.
It's Paul. Ann.
A question, let's see if I get this out coherently. Let's say, well, let's say, but at some point at the end of this process, we will come up with a recommendation for a plan to change that we believe is credible, that is doable based on the values, the priorities that we have studied and that we've shared. Okay, we've got this plan. So now I'm turning to Lucas and over here and saying, okay, how then can we ensure that whatever that plan is complements existing or easily modified zoning infrastructure within the city limits?
Yeah, so I would say infrastructure is part of our plan, so we'll address that in the planning document.
So that will be part of the planning document? Okay, so it hadn't come up before, sometimes.
Yeah, so infrastructure will be part of it. Zoning is really the next step. So adopting the plan as kind of step one for the strategy for the future for the city, but then ensuring that we have zoning districts that adequately reflect what's in the plan. So there'll probably be some rewrite of portions or all of our zoning code after the plan's adopted.
A good example for this topic is when we did the 2016 Old Town Plan. The Old Town Plan pushed for more mixed use small units of commercial retail. Our zoning didn't allow for it. We have that it exists downtown now because it's 100+ years old. But our zoning in 2015 did not allow for anybody to build it. So the results of the plan showed the community wanted more of that to be done. So we rewrote our code to allow for it. And now we have the 2 brand new buildings that are permitted by zoning to go there because it was a reflection of what the plan recommended code be changed to do. So at a bigger scale, we have the ability to do that with the whole community.
And it can be revised the other direction too.
And it could be revised in any direction, yeah.
Meaning like, if it's zoned for something, you can know that you can rezone to, based on the plan, to not allow for that. So, good question. I was trying to kind of figure the same way to ask that same question. So, it's like, what control does the city really have over the property? Somebody has a piece of property and the money to do something, what ground do you have to stand on to say
As
this?
part of the plan, there'll be the implementation section. So the last section of the plan is implementation, and those items should be addressed in the implementation section.
One of the things
Can
we remember as a
sorry.
group is that this has a ton of great data, but it's just one piece of the puzzle, and it's our first tangible piece that we have now.
Well, I think it's one of several tangible
Well,
pieces, right? I mean,
the first, I would say not the first piece, but the first big,
You can hold it.
something that you actually can see, reference, and say, okay, yes, this group values this. It's that first part of it, and it's just one part. We have
And you said it reflects, you were surprised at how much it reflected the Post-it notes, right?
yes, absolutely.
Were there comments on the Post-it notes that, like, clearly that was out of the blue, because that's not represented here at all? Was there anything that stuck out of your mind that you saw?
Chocolate Street.
The chocolate, yeah, the chocolate.
No,
street.
the Post-it note was a chocolate street, so that sticks out.
Yeah, I should have had them wait by
Yeah.
chocolate street people. No, we're gonna have to do another deep dive back into the big idea boards, right?
Yeah.
And see if there's anything, generally that sticks out there. Nothing's coming to mind.
I think the thing that comes to mind, it's not necessarily contradictory, but I think the big ideas reflected more support for development because people could identify specific things that they wanted. I want an Olive Garden. I want a Target.
A movie theater.
I want a movie
bowling alley,
theater.
Whatever.
And so when people start to think about things more specifically and more concretely, I think that the sentiments shift a little bit in terms of, oh, if you said to them, okay, so you want all green space, so that means no Target, they'd be like, oh, wait, no, I want a Target.
That's
Like,
where
let's,
education comes in.
yeah. And I think that would be, just from my memory, the thing that kind of sticks out.
I would also caution and say that not every result in this report is anti-development. Table 7.3, you have nearly, 60% saying we need more traditional Main Street mixed use areas. Okay, we have just over 50% saying we need more neighborhood scale mixed use areas. So I think we have been getting, through this and through our other outreach efforts, a direction, like Jane, like you just said, where we're getting overwhelmingly, and of course this afternoon, Target, oh my gosh, I didn't know Target was so popular with that. That's it, and Barnes and Noble too.
Yeah.
That was the other one, I think that's because they just are so desperate for a place that they feel comfortable, welcome in, and they find it's cool to hang out. And I don't have kids of my own. I'm shocked to hear high school kids in 2022 saying, I want, we have to get rides up to 256 because we like to hang out at Barnes and Noble. And I'm thinking like, yes, I'm like, I like hanging out at Barnes and Noble back in the 90s, and, maybe I'm not as old as I feel some days, but what I think that we do have now is we're really kind of getting toward understanding or answering that question of, what is the consensus around development? Turning the other flip side of that is in terms of what the market supports. I think what we're ultimately going to find out in this process is, aside from an overwhelming, let's say, sense that, you were to hypothetically say, we want to be Dublin, or, we want to be Easton or something comparable to that, right? That probably wouldn't be supportable, in the next 5 to 10 years in the Southeast market. But barring that, there are a lot of, supportable uses in the sense that if you want to go with a neighborhood scale context, the traditional Main Street context, that's really the sweet spot in terms of attracting the types of developers that can build those buildings that aren't, 100, 150 unit buildings, which it sounds like you don't want, but are, maybe 5 unit, 10, 15 unit buildings that have a retail component, right? And we know how to do that very well. We know how to get that spirit of what makes Old Town, and put some policies in place that allows for new development to come in, that matches that. And then we can get into the other uses as well, right? I mean, is there room in the market for more industrial? Yes, there is. It's no surprise that people are overwhelmingly saying we don't want to see any more of it. But is there room, in this market to go and be, Commercial Point or, Rickenbacker Part 3? There actually isn't, Now that's the fear, because people drive through those areas and they see, the farmland getting subsumed by 1 million+ square foot, box buildings, and they just think that, well, naturally it's going to be at my doorstep next year. But they're,
We'll have to wait till next year.
well, I'm talking, Michael, I'm talking like million, I'm talking Commercial Point where they're doing 1 million square foot projects. We get into the industrial data, you'll see that that's
We
leading,
have 1 million square feet just north of 33.
leading the region. Not in one building, right? They're,
One is 875,000 and the other one's,
okay.
they're side by side, but
But
your
that's
point's
education
taken.
again too, because the people that are watching the Columbus buildings go up think that they're in Canal.
Mhm.
Right, but sometimes perception is everything.
Oh, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I see the same Facebook comments, why we're building another warehouse. Well, we're not building it, but
But
it's hard to get, yes.
Our sense of quality.
But it's out of our control.
And it will be if we don't protect our borders.
Yes.
And that's where, going back to, a lot of the exhibits we were working with in September, right? That, annexation plan is such a crucial component where, it really needs to be defined. Okay, what are the realistic growth boundaries based on your utility capacity? What are they going to be? We plan the future land use within those areas, even if they're not currently incorporated into Canal Winchester. And actually make that case that, what? If these areas aren't incorporated under, a really cohesive vision for what the development is going to look like, they're going to be tacked onto Columbus, or they're going to be tacked on to Groveport, right? Or they're going to be tacked on eventually to Pickerington, right? And then, you don't have that level of control. So, the stakes are a little bit higher in Ohio than they are in the other Midwestern states where the annexation laws aren't as liberal as they are here.
Is that something that we're going to like study or be presented or figure out in terms of how much land there is to use? Like we keep talking about land use studies and we talk about the different development types, but like, I mean, we're all really familiar with our community and whatever, but like how much land is there that's available?
That's the inventory.
Yeah, what's the inventory?
That's something that can be quickly put together. This
Okay.
inventory.
And we-
We did some of that in September.
I
Yes.
think
I think we
that's-
have
Yes.
some sort of-
I think that's a big education component, and then another thing that I was gonna say earlier, kind of piggybacking off some of the stuff you're saying earlier was, from the education standpoint, I know that you and I, Andrew, were talking one day about, people chattering about Chick-fil-A and different things that people want, we've talked about Barnes and Noble and Target, these different things. Can we educate the community about the real estate standards that these companies have? It's not just Canal saying we want to go out and get them, like they have a certain amount of roofs, they have to be in a certain amount of square miles, like, is that data that you guys have from previous studies? Or maybe that you guys know? that-
Yeah, so
Yeah.
some of that was in Bob's presentation.
Some of that is in Bob's presentation, but we also have that data. Now, if you ask these companies for it, right, they'll say it's confidential, but if you know what you're doing, you can extrapolate a pretty clear picture of it. And that's just simply by experience and by surveying the individual sites where these places locate. I mean, there's two sides to this coin. I don't want to speak for Bob, but I know if he were here, he'd say that you can also use the leverage to, if a particular chain wants to locate in your community and you have high standards, you can use that leverage to ensure that, they meet those standards through, local regulation. On the other hand, if it's something like a Chick-fil-A that's got their model with their whatever quadruple drive-through crazy stacking area, and they want so many car counts going by a particular intersection, and you're in a fairly large region, they want to locate somewhere, they may just say, well, we're just going to go into Columbus, and go one interchange down, and then you'll still have it. You won't be generating the tax revenue from it. But, at the same time, gosh, when we're looking at Chick-fil-A, if I just look at where they are in the region, where are they not? They're not anywhere in the southeast quadrant, right, along the 33 corridor. And the way those restaurants tend to, it's not just local regulation or design standards or absence thereof that helps them regulate. It's also where are the other similar businesses. So when I look at Diley Road and I see, Chipotle going in there and McDonald's already being there, even though that's technically not in the city, I see that as probably one of the areas their market analysts are looking at, potentially optioning.
I think one thing that Jeff Bernstein did a really good job articulating was you're setting up all those triangles and how everything links up. And you can start to create themes. And so you have the big idea boards that create themes on, what the general public randomly asks if they want. Looking at a more macro level than Chick-fil-A, they want fast dining. Or, they say they want a Target, they want a regional place that they can go and have a retail experience. If you start taking those themes between that, the survey, the market study that's being done, you can focus on how much land should be, programmed to be commercial versus other types of land uses. And you can start to really create a plan that has data to back it up, that makes it more viable to enforce and makes it, something that is usable. And so that's something I think is, very helpful, because when you're looking at specific chain poaching, I try to reach out to a company to get them to locate here, and their answer was, we don't locate anywhere where we cannot see a Chick-fil-A. But that's a very specific requirement you have.
But they share the same demographic
And they share the
profile
same
with
profile. And so, you can't like go to that zoom in on the level because you'll get lost. But if you can say people want experiences or dining, or, you can start at that level and zone appropriately to help facilitate it to happen.
And I just pulled up, this isn't the final, just because it was easy for me to look at, his draft report, it was 162,000 square feet of just the retail component of this. You think about 162,000 square feet, your Meijer store is, you probably know it, Andrew, right off the top of your head, but it's over 100,000. It's probably what, around 110?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
I think
Okay.
it's like 140.
Yeah.
Is it bigger than that?
140,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so, you think about that, think about, like basically a
It's
Meijer.
2 times the size of Kroger.
Okay.
160,000 square feet.
Okay, so you want to think about basically one more Meijer, but you can slice up that Meijer store any number of ways. And in terms of smaller businesses or even a few chain businesses, that have a small footprint, and then distributing those, sprinkling those into the appropriate areas throughout the community, not just necessarily Old Town, but if there's a vision to do something a little bit different in Waterloo, for example, or something a little bit different in the area, further east that we haven't, or excuse me, further west that we haven't really envisioned, but I think is on the map.
That's a building the size of Meijer between us, Pickerington, Groveport, like in the whole trade area.
Right.
So that's something also, it's another dynamic, is you're not saying that 160s in Canal proper, that's in that bubble.
Mhm.
So if you start slicing the pie, those slices get really small. you know, when you start to spread them out, you know, just think of just like throwing sand, if they go everywhere, your piece is really tiny. So I think that's also something, you know, the data.
Although,
Yeah.
sorry for interrupting there without a hand raised, but another way to look at the trade area though too, Andrew, is that if you center the trade area on another destination, the draw comes from a whole nother region too. So it's not just everyone cannibalizing the trade within that area. It's that the trade area also in other places draws from other people. So it's a wider net for other communities as well. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think, you know, that's, I guess just when you see the numbers in the report, if you don't understand it could be divided equally, possibly between the entire bubble, you know, then you start having a vision that's like up here and setting a plan for something that's up here rather than like being conservative and scaling back is, I think, in my opinion, a more appropriate.
We need to weight it to Canal Winchester. is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Maybe it's 100,000 of that 160 comes to Canal Winchester, you know, so.
I think the other thing too that, you know, needs to be kind of prefaced, right, is that, you know, quality development induces other development. So when we're talking about, you know, what's a conservative scenario for what's supportable now, in terms of what we talked about tonight with housing and what Bob's talked about with retail, that's kind of slam dunk level, okay? I mean, that's where you're not gonna have a hard time finding developers over the next 5 years that would be interested, given the right conditions to do that in terms of floor space. That comes online, right? What does that do? That now attracts 800 new households with purchasing power. And those rooftops are going to induce, you know, additional entrepreneurs to want to come in, whether they be in an established corporate environment or not, and locate there. Those are drawing in people to this area that previously weren't coming to Canal for anything, right? If you just think back 20 years to before Winchester Square was built, right? It was almost like, what's that?
Right. And so I grew up in this area, and Bryce Road was Gender Road, Winchester Square when I was growing up.
Right.
Where everybody went. So that's, I think, from my just time on this planet's perspective, is you want to plan for doing better than what Bryce Road did when it phased out. And that needs to be part of the process. And I think when we did the charrette at Brewdog, we talked about how can you enhance Gender Road to keep it viable. And so that's also part of the puzzle is, you know, you don't want to build out to capacity, no new developments coming in to keep the upkeep. Then you have the phase out when Gender Road moves to Groveport or Lithopolis or, you know, wherever's the next development they're chasing. So that's part of the puzzle too. This group is starting to chart, helping figure it out is, you know, how do you plan for long-term sustainability?
And that's why we've talked so much about context, right, when it comes to future land use. And I mean, this goes back to, you know, we as a team interviewed for this project, right, is I use the example that just in my lifetime, my earliest memory, right, is Northland Mall up on Morse Road being like the premier retail destination. I remember like 85, 86 Christmas time, you know, cheek, granted I was a little kid, but cheek to jowl. I remember like Nickelodeon came there and did like, you know, like auditions for their TV shows back in the 80s. I may or may not have wanted to participate in those, but needless to say, right, I've seen that arc from its peak, you know, all the way to, you know, its trough. And now, you know, that's been re-envisioned. At the same time, I remember when the first, you know, bulldozers came in and started developing Easton, which is now, you know, like Bob says, I mean, its trade area is effectively the state of Ohio and beyond, right? And you could say, is it peaking? Has it yet reached its peak? Or are we learning from the past and doing things differently to try and keep these places viable? So as this community, when you think about Gender Road, Winchester Square, and even over on Diley Road, right, part of this process is to say, okay, do we want that to be, just repeat that 40-year cycle? Because it really is about a 40-year cycle if things don't change, if it's not adaptable and flexible, you know, to new uses, and to fundamental change within those developments. And then also to think about, you know, like Andrew was saying, you know, new developments that maybe they're a little bit more what we would call anti-fragile in terms of not just being purpose-built for a specific place at a specific year in time. And those are the ones that if they don't change, then they are going to cycle down over a generation.
And following up on that, Adam, to what extent does or should a cohesive and a credible plan look at what has caused deterioration, decay, Price Road, Northland, and factor whatever the common denominators are in the past decays into forward planning?
Well, I mean, I think the common denominators are kind of just what I said, right? Which is if you were to say, you know, we like Winchester Square the way it is, you know, we're just going to assume that it stays the way it is in perpetuity.
The trends aren't staying for building type, tenant type, the way that it is. That's when it changes.
And that's how planning, you know, traditionally had been done.
But then I also see areas like perception, Bryce Road and Northland. I see changing neighborhoods around them, adversely affecting their popularity as retail destination.
I would say crime, traffic, you know, accessibility, all those things.
And I see Winchester Square, for example, I don't want to beat it up, but just in the planning thing, I see the traffic already among the neighbors that I have being deterrents. So that's why I asked, to what extent do we incorporate some of that awareness as long-term planning?
Yep, yeah.
So we don't have
transportation will be
So we don't have
addressed.
obsolescence.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing. Transportation and land use, right, are intimately connected. One directly influences the other. And so to say something like, you know, Winchester Square may at some point in the future trend towards more of a walkable destination, or at least a destination where people can drive there, park once, and they don't need to get in their car, you know, until they're completely done in the area. I mean, that's going to take, you know, we're not going to do, you know, a full scale traffic study, but if you did one, I would guarantee you that you could take 30 to 40% of those cars at a given time around Ginder Road, Winchester Boulevard at busy peak times. You could probably take them off the road because so much of that traffic is generated by somebody going to Kroger, getting in their car and driving, you know, not terribly far distance to a different parking spot, or driving out onto Winchester Boulevard so they can get across and they can park again at Wendy's, right? Or driving across so they can park again at Walmart. And the physical distances for most people aren't untraversable on foot, but who in their right mind would make those trips from store to store on foot in that environment right now, you know? So I missed that.
Trying to cross the gender road.
Yeah.
You take your life in your hands, yes.
Exactly.
No,
I
don't
think
get
the
ahead of
signal for
ourselves. We're
crossing
getting
would be like
in the weeds,
15
but
seconds and
just-
take you 25 seconds to walk in.
Absolutely.
Adam, can you speak to where we are and where we're going? We're not meeting in January.
So our schedule as of now is that we're not meeting in January. I am open to doing a January meeting if you all would like to do one. I think we've got more market data to present that just due to the way the survey came out and time constraints, we haven't had time to present that I would like to have more time to discuss with you all. At the same time, you know, I don't want to just kind of throw another meeting out there because we've got kind of the committed group in this room and we've got some other people that, you know, make it when they can. And obviously schedules are what they are. But I will throw that out there that, you know, it's our desire, strong desire to keep this project moving, you know, at the best pace that we can.
Do you
So
believe you'll have enough material by the third Thursday in January? There's enough material for us to bite into and keep chewing?
yeah,
And
I think we'll have the full report ready for you
I'd like that.
in
We have an
January.
extra week somehow, between now and then, so it's 5 weeks away. It'll be the 19th.
And are you still planning another public session in February?
And so that's the other thing that we haven't had time to discuss in these meetings, right? Is that we kind of said we were going to reschedule our second workshop for sometime in February. We haven't fixed dates on that yet.
Well, we'll be ready for it.
I think we will be ready for it. I think between the conclusory evidence that we have from the survey in terms of we've really now come very close to honing in on, a set of values, right? That we can all start just kind of taking as gospel. And then looking at development patterns, right, in light of them, which is what Andrew and Lucas were saying in their previous comments tonight, as well as specific market data where we can say, okay, I mean, this is a slam dunk for you in terms of product type, floor plate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what we're trying to get in that second workshop is an actual articulated vision of what, if you're going to do future development, what that's going to look like, right? So we were trying to get you started on that last month as the steering committee, right, with that exercise where we were showing you all sorts of precedents to try, and I know it was a knee-jerk reaction, but that was kind of by design. If you read that memo, we expanded on that a little bit more. But to kind of open that dialogue a little bit, early on, so that you would have kind of the lead time to start thinking about these different sort of types of development from a context perspective. But I think that's what we want to accomplish and achieve in a public forum.
Adam, I had February 16, 17, which is the third Thursday, Friday of February, held on the calendar. Soft hold. We hadn't confirmed it, but that was what we were thinking.
So I think the way it would work is we're planning on 2 days either way. I think we've got, 3 weeks in February where that can take place. 16, 17, I think the reason that's a hold for you, Paul, is because that would otherwise be a regular steering committee meeting on the third Thursday, which would be the 16th. But there's also the option of 23rd, 24th, or 9th and 10th. So I'm not suggesting that we come to a decision now. That's something that we could do more as a,
Online polls.
yeah. I'm blanking on what we were using when we were trying to schedule workshop slots, but we can do an online poll for that and see if there are any dates that absolutely do not work for people or dates that you prefer. I'm still up in the air. I may have to be out of state on the 16th, 17th. But
in this community, there's a lot of organizations that meet on the fourth Thursday.
That's good to know.
so you're suggesting that's probably not the date.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be.
I know as I've tried to hold meetings, it's like, well, I can't do it on we always meet on every month on the fourth
Yeah.
Thursday.
It can be a Tuesday, Wednesday. It doesn't have to be say Thursday or Thursday, Friday.
Right.
It does not have to be a Thursday, Friday necessarily. No, it can be a Wednesday, Thursday. But then again, we're starting to telescope out with potential dates and combinations of dates.
Because you're really looking at something that more people from the community would be able to come in. right?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying that fourth
Yeah.
Thursday, you may have a lot of people go to Bible study.
Mhm.
The most common feedback I had about the last event in September, I had to work, I couldn't get there.
Right, during the day. I couldn't get there, yeah.
What about doing Saturday and Sunday?
We could try Saturday, Sunday. How do people feel about that?
I'm good.
I would have trouble.
Okay.
Just with youth sports and tournaments and all that, kids being involved in events, it's pretty much every Saturday and Sunday.
I think
And
that's
you're not
the,
alone.
I'm coaching.
Right,
sports,
I
all those
think
things, so it's-
Yeah.
that is kind of the,
Sports have a break ever. Nothing.
Yeah.
Right, people are busy there, so there's always going to be something. Weekday, weekend, day, evening. I think the idea for this is it's going to be a little different than Brewdog, right? So the idea behind Brewdog was to be here with the entire team just for a week nonstop, right? And so as you saw, there was a different flow to it in that there were daytime events, there were evening events. The plan is we're going to have this at the community center here. So it's going to be in a different location, maybe a more accessible location that you don't have to specifically make a trip to, like a destination like you did Brewdog, which hopefully will capture other people. And I think it's going to be really weighted toward 2 evenings of kind of a presentation and a work group. And yet we're going to be here again, working during the day with, whomever is wants to join us and is able to do it. But we really want to do it kind of over the course of 2 evenings in the hopes that, we can get a pretty significant audience. And, from what I'm hearing, based on word of mouth that, the last event actually went pretty well. I think we may, be able to get more people, and I would sincerely hope that we do.
So I think seeing that it's 8 o'clock, I'm gonna be a little bit of the timekeeper since Paul usually is, but he's virtual. Let's send out a online poll to just get a feeling, at least for this immediate group's availability. And then also preference for having a meeting in January.
I'll vote for January meeting.
I'm good.
right now.
Yeah, I think that one seems like it's, yeah, so, all right.
So that would be just so you can write it down, and we'll get this out. The third Thursday in January is January 19th.
5:30 in here, or?
Yep.
I think we'll be in here
We would do
now.
5:30 either in here or across the way.
I think the setup works out a little bit better in the TV.
I'm online and I can already tell just by looking at it, everybody in this room, that the setup's better.
Yeah.
Definitely a good room
The
for
setup
Tom.
being better here.
I like this room, yeah.
I think it's because it's a little bit cozier. And we've got that really,
Everyone's here, it's hard to fit everyone, but if we don't have everyone here, then it's better.
Yeah.
we've got that really cool graphic now on the frosting. I'm geeked out about that.
I was looking at that, that's.
I like that.
That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Oh, that actually graphics.
Well, it seems like everybody's winding down. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person tonight, but I appreciate the opportunity to participate by Zoom, and I'll be down there next time. And just want to say thank you. It's good to see everybody. Happy holidays. I'll see you soon.
Bye, Paul.
Bye.
Bye, Paul.